Hello, my creative friends, and welcome to another episode of The Daily Prompt. My name is Jeff. I am, or was at one point, attempting to be an independent film producer who spent many years searching for material. When I couldn't find anything, I started trying to figure out how to solve my problem, how to get writers from their idea to not just a screenplay, but a screenplay that we could actually say yes to and go out and package and turn into a film. And it sent me way down this rabbit hole of how do we get from idea to story to screenplay to the sale? How do we navigate that process? And the further I went down this road, the more I realized something that I guess when I was studying screenwriting, when I was trying to write my own screenplays, when I was a young pup banging out the scripts and getting halfway in and going, this isn't really working, is it? I got a better idea. And reading all the books about put this there, and then reading it back going, this is not very good. I think one of the things that I didn't appreciate back then that I only started to appreciate once I got sufficiently far down that rabbit hole is that everything is interconnected. Everything is interconnected. Every detail of every story has ripple effects throughout your whole project. I think one of the things that new writers in particular, or intermediate writers who are maybe stuck in that inability to get over that hump. I think one of the things that they fail to appreciate is that every single choice you make throughout your entire project is interconnected with every other single choice you make throughout your project. In order for a story to work, in order for a story to be effective, every detail, every aspect, every nuance of that story has to be connected. It has to be woven into the fabric of the story itself. So, for example, and I've talked about this one way buried back in some of the older episodes that you'll probably never get a chance to watch. The idea that if you made a different character choice, the character would make different choices. So, for example, if I had created a story where my central character looked just like me, was a sort of approaching middle-aged white guy, slightly out of shape, mediocre looking, of average to below average height, it started to make certain choices, things would happen to that character. The world is going to interact with that character, and the choices that character makes are going to be very different than if that same character was turned into a, let's say, teenage black girl, tall, skinny. How's that? Somebody quite different to me, with maybe a different educational background, a different social circle. Are they in an all-black community, or are they in a all-white community? How does that affect the character's choices and how the world interacts with that character? These kinds of subtleties and dynamics are the very things that comprise the story, right? So the choices that you make, something as simple as what gender, what ethnicity, what age, what body shape is your character overall, and how does that change and affect the story itself? The story itself could be, or would be, probably, likely, would be entirely different if you had simply those two different characters thrust into the same scenario, right? So let's say, each character has a parent who's dying, who they decide for whatever reason, I don't know, to rob a bank to make a lot of money, a Breaking Bad-esque thing where they, rob a bank to make a lot of money to save their parent. Well, first of all, if it was me, right, if it was this character, the parent would be older. So how would that affect things? Would the parent be someone who had an estate that they were hoping to get? Or would it be a parent that they haven't spoken with for a very long time? The younger character, the parent would be quite a lot younger, maybe would be the person who they rely on so the subtleties of those differences in those choices means that the whole story plays out quite differently. You could still have scenes where, let's say, the best friend tries to talk the person out of it. It's going to be very different, and the kinds of things that are talked about, the dialogue's going to be different, the setting's going to be different, the effects and implications of that are going to be quite different. If a character was of my type, and the best friend was trying to talk that person out of taking that action, well, there could be some politics of past history with that character, and therefore the reason for rejecting would be would be possibly a duplicitousness on the part of the friend, and so everything would be suspect, and it would take on a different thematic message or a thematic meaning for the characters in that situation, and therefore the entire story would take on perhaps a different meaning. What would be expressed to the audience would be necessarily different. The best friend of this other character would probably be a similar age, therefore maybe naive to what the outcome might be, or has witnessed people in their life that have done something similar, or who knows what the choices are. My point is that these are the types of things that writers have to think about and understand when you're making the choices for your story. So because of the very specific connection that every detail of your story has to every story, character, scene, subplot, subtext, situational choice that you make for your story, it really makes rewriting a big challenge. It really makes developing each of those elements a challenge. It's why I always say that you can't just focus on the element of the story itself. You can't just sit here and talk about dialogue and how punchy your dialogue is. The dialogue is very intricately woven into the characters that we've chosen. It's very nuanced. And what kind of dialogue you use and the effects that dialogue has can very much have this ripple effect throughout your story. So the reason I bring this up today is because one of the challenges that I have is when I read scripts. If you haven't watched the Feedback Loop series that I did last year, we did 12 episodes where we looked at the first 3 pages of a different writer each week, and we spent an hour with each writer and examined those first 3 pages and really looked at those pages to understand how the producer is viewing those pages. The producer, or whoever you're submitting to, is always going to be reviewing your pages through the lens of an assumption that every detail here is interconnected. And if that's true, and it is, because that's what story is, if we assume that every detail is interconnected, then every detail on your page is saying something to us, is helping fill out the picture of the story that you're telling us. So when we read your script, new writers often wonder, how is it possible that a producer could look at one page or first 3 pages of my project and know that this is a yes or a no, and know that I'm ready or I'm not ready for writing at a professional level. And the reason is because as you go through those first couple of pages, the writing style, the writing language, the characters and the situation and the scene that you've built and the pictures that you're putting in your reader's mind, every detail is interconnected. So every detail gives us a picture of how full and how complete your picture and your story actually is. So because of the challenge of crafting something with this degree of complexity and nuance and finesse, because of this challenge, so many people look at the sparseness of the words on the page. There's not that many words on a given screenplay page. And so we think, well, it's just a few words. I can throw a few words together. Absolutely. And I would argue that pretty much anyone, anywhere, can write a screenplay formatted page of words. But that doesn't mean you've written a screenplay, and that doesn't mean that you've written a story. It doesn't mean that every detail of your story is interconnected. So what's the problem with that? Well, the problem is if you create a story or a screenplay where details are not really relevant to what's going on, don't really come into play later on in the story, are a distraction or a diversion or irrelevant to the general thrust of the narrative that you're creating. If that's what we read on your pages, it becomes very apparent very quickly that this is not a whole story. And if this is not a whole story, this is not viable. This is not something that we can say yes to. This is not something that we can put together. If we make a movie with scenes that don't fit into the narrative or with a character that doesn't fit into the story, we've all seen movies where there's this one character that's like, feels like he's from another movie. If we create movies where the dialogue is flat or in some ways disconnected to whatever the feeling or general tone or thrust or meaning or emotional content or if it's disconnected from any of that stuff, when we watch it in a movie, we feel like that scene should be cut, or there's a hole in the story, or what is this all about? We can see the same thing in a script. A script is really just the cinema on the page, the cinematic experience. We want to be able to imagine as we're reading the screenplay, the movie that we would be watching in the end. When you read those details that are not interconnected with everything else, it's very clear that the writer has not gone to the trouble of making sure that their project is powerful and effective. That's one of the great difficulties in teaching writing, in teaching writers how to understand and appreciate and really embrace this challenge and complexity of the craft itself. Most writers don't want to hear that it's that nuanced. They don't want to hear that there is this complexity to it because it seems big and it seems overwhelming and it seems too much to keep a handle on. But it's not really. It's a matter of understanding what your story is. It's a matter of understanding why your story is. Why are you telling this story? It's a matter of understanding who the characters are and are they the most effective characters to tell this particular story? Is this the most effective world in which to set these characters? Are these scenes the most effective events and moments in your character's life to add up to the point or purpose of your story itself? How do we get there? How do we create that? Well, my belief is that we create it organically. My belief is that we start with what is the point and purpose of the story, and then we take that and we use that to find the idea, to find what we're trying to say. Then we figure out how that would best be expressed, and we grow that story organically so that every detail is really serving the thrust of the point of the thing, the purpose, the raison d'etre of creating your project. So, how do we do that? Step by step by step. We go through that process. That's my take on it. That's what I believe we need to do, because to take your idea and to shoehorn it into some pre-existing notion of what goes where on a page could itself be fundamentally disconnected with the point and purpose you're trying to get across. We're working on a little sci-fi project as the initial project in this thing that I'm trying to vlog about and talk about throughout all this. This sci-fi project will probably have some semblance of a 3-act structure to it, but it's not driven by that. And in fact, part of the point and purpose of this sci-fi project that we're creating is to challenge some of those very notions. And so how do we create a narrative that effectively challenges those notions, that effectively puts in the audience's mind a wider frame of view, a different perspective, a different read on what is an otherwise linear storytelling narrative? If story is about taking the audience through the journey that the character is going on, watching the character make those choices, and through that experience, learning something or changing or growing or being different in some way that at the end than they were at the beginning. And that difference conveying the meaning of what the writer's trying to get across. If that is ultimately the goal, then to show how subjective an experience this is, we need to create a story that challenges your pre-existing assumptions. So to do that, we can't just fit things into some this goes here, that goes there narrative that by definition would negate the point we're trying to make. So when you look at how to go about doing this, you really need a full breadth of understanding of all the details, all the elements, all the nuances involved in conveying this. You need to know how the characters and the dialogue and the scenes and the subtext and the subplots and the world view and the tension and the pacing and and all that elements. You need to know how all of it is interconnected, each with the other. It happens naturally, it happens intuitively, it happens organically. And again, there's no right or wrong. But as an audience, we're going to assume that they are all interconnected. And when it doesn't feel quite right, when the movie didn't really work for me, it's because some elements were not effectively interconnected. So, how do we go about getting there? We go about getting there by going through the process. We go about getting there by building our stories organically. I'll put another link to the Hidden Story Dynamic video series. Have another look at that. It's worth revisiting. Anything that I put on this channel is worth revisiting at some point. There will always be something in there that you can come back to, get a new fresh perspective and insight based on all the things you've learned in the interim, and see it in a whole new way, get a whole new value out of it. But by growing that organically, learning how to do that effectively and fluidly and quickly, that's how we're going to naturally, spontaneously, in a mastery sort of way, create material that producers can say yes to. Create material that is effective, powerful, page-turner reader experiences that when the reader picks it up, they cannot put it down. The reason they're flicking through those pages and can't put it down is because every single detail on every single page is connected to everything they've had before and everything that they're imagining forward. And it's going beyond what their imagination is giving them. So in that way, the secret to success as a screenwriter is to know what your audience is going to expect in this interconnected story world, and then to exceed their expectations. That's the way you're going to blow them out of the water. That's the way you're going to do an effective job at creating material that audiences will love. So I know this seems a little bit esoteric. I know there's probably gone into, there might be parts of this video that you're going, wait, what now? Have another look at it. Check it out. It does make sense. It does add up. But to get there, one of the reasons that I always talk about that this will take a fair bit of time, 10, 15 years to master this craft, or the 10,000 hour rule of the amount of time you have to put into it continuously improving, is because of this complexity, because of the fact that everything is interconnected. If you don't fully appreciate, or you don't accept, or you don't give proper respect to the fact that everything is interconnected, you will forever limit your possibilities when it comes to screenwriting. When we turn it into a film, when we make it into a movie, everything gets amplified even more. So we have to make sure that it's effective in the screenplay before we can run out and go turn it into a film, because that's when things get really obvious. That's when we shine a magnifying glass on the project and go, hey, look at that giant hole right there. It might not be quite as obvious in the script, unless you're somebody like me who's read thousands of scripts, and you go, there's a hole right there. But for a lot of people, you might look at it and go, I don't see holes in it. But once you film it and you put it on the screen, becomes very obvious. So we need to understand that everything is interconnected so that we can go about very deliberately making sure that every choice serves whatever it is what we're trying to say. So Today's daily prompt, I suppose, is take a look at what you're creating, what you've created in the past. Maybe pull out an old script that you tried writing before, for some reason didn't quite work. Have a look back through it and look for things that are not connected with everything else. Or maybe something sets something up, but it's not really tonally in sync with what the rest of the movie is about. Some scene that's random or some character that's kind of not right for the story you're telling. Have a look at it through that lens. I think you're going to notice probably some of the problems that caused the project to get derailed. So hopefully this helps. Let me know in the comments below. Be sure to subscribe, click the little bell icon to be notified of upcoming episodes. Sign up for all the social media stuff. Join me on my webinar if you're interested in doing so, or in the system if you want to take this process step by step and make sure you leave absolutely no stone unturned. But whatever you do, take action today. Take action every single day. We'll see you in the next episode. Thanks for watching.